At 9:12 a.m. under the desert sun, just 7 miles from El Paso, a column of 25 armored trucks thundered north, each loaded with chemical precursors worth nearly $5 billion on the black market. Guarding the convoy were more than 130 hired gunmen, riding with heavy machine guns and improvised armor, determined to reach a fortress already holding 180 hostages inside. Behind its steel walls and razor wire, the cartel believed itself untouchable. Overhead, US MQ-9 drones tracked every movement, their sensors feeding back radar signatures, infrared scans, and radio intercepts. Yet commanders in the Joint Operations Center ruled out a precision airstrike. One wrong detonation would turn the captives into collateral. Instead, electronic warfare blanketed the area, jamming hostile frequencies and masking the eyes of cartel spotters. 95 attack drones shifted westward, preparing to strike as a diversion, while Navy SEAL teams advanced from the east with thermite charges ready. Was this fortress truly invincible, or had the cartel built a billion-dollar trap? And could America's strike force save every hostage before the clock hit zero? At 9:12 a.m., the operation entered its decisive stage. On satellite feeds, the desert near El Paso was no longer empty. It pulsed with movement. 25 armored trucks rolled north in tight formation, throwing up walls of dust behind them. Each vehicle carried part of a cargo worth nearly $5 billion, 1,300 chemical drums of benzyl alcohol, N-methylformamide, and other precursors vital for synthetic production on an industrial scale. Guarding this convoy were 130 mercenaries, riding in reinforced pickups and SUVs with mounted guns, their weapons bristling under the morning sun. Above them, MQ-9 Reaper drones circled at 18,000 feet, lenses fixed on every turn of the convoy. Smaller Raven and Puma UAVs skimmed closer, transmitting imagery so detailed that analysts could track the spacing between vehicles and the pattern of guard rotations inside the fortress, just 7 miles from the US border. The mission objectives were clear: rescue 182 civilians trapped inside and prevent the cartel from consolidating its chemical arsenal. At 9:18, commanders in the Joint Operations Center faced the critical choice. A pair of 2,000-pound JDAMs could obliterate the compound, but they would also kill the hostages instantly. The option was rejected outright. What remained was a plan as risky as it was precise. 95 drones, some carrying flash charges, others rigged as loitering munitions, would attack the western perimeter in waves. The aim was deception, not destruction. Convince the defenders that the main blow was coming from the west. At the same time, Navy SEAL teams would infiltrate the eastern wall, where defenders would be thinnest. Electronic warfare built the foundation of this ruse. At 9:20, an EC-37B Compass Call aircraft expanded its jamming profile. Enemy radios dissolved into static, GPS readings failed, and surveillance cameras began registering false contacts. Cartel spotters reported drones in locations where none existed. The fortress's trusted systems suddenly became unreliable, and in that uncertainty, the operators found their opening. By 9:22, 2 SEAL assault elements were in position along the eastern wall. Inserted earlier by helicopters flying at treetop height, they had crawled into gullies carved by seasonal floods. Each man carried suppressed rifles, thermite rods for cutting wire, and linear charges for breaching. Behind them, sniper teams scanned towers through Mk-13 precision optics, ready to fire at the slightest movement. The assault clock was ticking. At 9:27, the diversion began. A wave of drones swooped onto the western wall, detonating against antennas and spotlights. Explosions echoed across the desert as defenders scrambled, turning their heavy machine guns skyward. Bright tracer rounds cut down several UAVs, but the swarm pressed on, striking gatehouses and blasting fuel drums. Flames rose, casting confusion over the perimeter. Inside the compound, defenders reacted exactly as expected. Fighters ran toward the western wall, convinced that the fortress was under direct attack. Commanders tried to coordinate through radios, but U.S. jamming fractured their instructions into bursts of static. Some mercenaries reinforced positions already destroyed, while others abandoned patrol routes altogether. In minutes, the western defenses were saturated and the east was left exposed. At 9:33, the SEALs reached the wire. Thermite cutters flared, eating through coils of razor steel in seconds. The barriers dropped in smoldering clumps. Linear charges were pressed into place, forming a man-sized breach. As timers clicked down, quadcopters darted forward, smashing into surveillance cameras and detonating in sudden flashes. At that same instant, 2 sniper shots rang out, silencing guards in nearby towers. For the first time since the operation began, the eastern wall was silent. By 9:38, the deception reached its peak. Loitering drones struck armored trucks parked near the western gate, flipping them in fireballs. Thick smoke poured skyward, visible for miles. Defenders doubled down, rushing more fighters west. The eastern side was now almost bare. At 9:42, the wall erupted. Shaped charges tore steel apart in a thunderous blast. Dust and debris exploded outward as the breach opened wide enough for a squad to move through. Immediately, the first SEAL element surged forward in a wedge, rifles raised, clearing each angle with methodical precision. Quadcopters zipped through gaps, dropping stun grenades into alleyways and triggering tripwires before men could stumble onto them. Behind the assault, a second element secured the breach and marked a casualty collection point. Snipers continued their rhythm, striking any defender who dared expose themselves. By 9:47, the eastern wall was no longer a barrier. Less than 24 men had carved a path into a fortress once deemed impregnable. The defenders were still reacting to shadows on the wrong side, blind to the real entry. Phase 1 was complete. The fortress had been cracked. But ahead lay the most dangerous task: moving through the compound, neutralizing hundreds of armed fighters, and freeing 182 civilians before the defenders regrouped. And here, a dilemma hung in the air. If you were in command, would you risk sending operators deeper into hostile corridors to save hostages, or call for heavier strikes and accept civilian losses to end the threat in minutes? At 4:15 a.m. in Washington, the Situation Room shifted into high alert. Intelligence officers laid out the essentials. 182 civilians locked inside a fortress less than 10 miles from El Paso, 1,300 chemical drums stored in warehouses, and over 130 mercenaries armed with heavy weapons. On large screens, real-time feeds from MQ-9 drones and infrared scans showed defenders rushing between walls and towers. The Cartel fortress had been designed to withstand siege fire, and any miscalculation could cost hundreds of lives. Advisors weighed 2 stark choices. The first was overwhelming force, precision-guided bombs, stealth fighters valued near $100 million each, and the ability to deliver massed firepower within minutes. Such an option would erase the fortress, but sacrifice every hostage inside. The second was surgical. Insert special operations teams under drone and electronic warfare cover, disable defenses piece by piece, and rescue civilians at maximum risk to U.S. personnel. For planners, the debate was not about capability, but about credibility. Choosing bombardment would remove a threat, but damage America's image as a responsible actor. Opting for restraint carried tactical risk, yet it could reinforce U.S. resolve to protect innocents while dismantling billion-dollar criminal networks. Analysts emphasized another factor. Capturing the site intact would provide intelligence on the cartel's suppliers, routes, and international partners. By 4:27 a.m., the balance was clear. Orders were issued for a precision ground insertion. SEAL teams would breach, drones would mislead and strike selectively, and electronic warfare would blind communications. Heavy bombardment was rejected. The fortress would be taken apart from the inside, hostages first. The decision underscored a larger message. America would not trade civilian lives for convenience. even when overwhelming firepower was available. Yet it also raised a question. Had Washington demonstrated discipline that strengthened deterrence, or restraint that might tempt others to test its limits? At 9:15 a.m., the western perimeter of the Cartel fortress exploded into confusion. 95 drones surged forward in staggered waves. Quadcopters carried flash charges that burst against antennas. Loitering munitions dived onto surveillance towers with sharp concussions. The sequence of impacts was deliberate, explosions arriving seconds apart to simulate continuous bombardment. Floodlights shattered, cameras went dark, and fires flared across the outer wall. Cartel defenders reacted instantly. Heavy machine guns barked, streams of 12.7mm tracers clawing through the sky. A salvaged 14.5mm autocannon mounted on a flatbed truck opened fire, tearing apart several UAVs. But for every drone destroyed, another slipped through. Some slammed into gatehouses, others detonated against parked vehicles. Smoke and dust rolled westward, convincing defenders they faced a full-scale assault. On the eastern side, where watchtowers now stood undermanned, 2 SEAL assault teams crept to within 200 meters of the wall. Concealed in eroded gullies, they set to work. Thermite rods hissed as they ate through coils of razor wire, glowing bright orange until metal sagged into the dirt. Linear charges were pressed into place against the steel barrier. Each man checked gear in silence, rifles loaded, grenades clipped, radios low power. Overwatch snipers lay prone on ridgelines, MK-13 rifles fixed on targets, waiting for the breach. At 9:18, the diversion reached new intensity. Loitering munitions plunged into armored trucks, parked as reserve vehicles, detonating in orange fireballs. 2 vehicles flipped onto their sides. Ammunition inside cooked off in a secondary blast. Dozens of fighters abandoned eastern posts and sprinted west to reinforce what they thought was the main fight. Cartel commanders barked instructions through radios, but US jamming fractured words into static. Confusion spread like wildfire. By 9:22, the eastern wall was ready. Timers ticked down on shaped charges. Snipers fired in measured sequence. 2 guards dropped instantly. Small quadcopters zipped forward, smashing cameras and blasting lights. Then the wall erupted. Steel panels buckled inward with a deafening crack. Dust and fragments filled the air. The first SEAL fire team surged through, rifles raised, clearing corners with mechanical precision. Suppressed shots echoed as defenders were cut down before they could react. Behind them, a second element secured the breach. Medics marked a casualty collection point. Overhead, drones streamed in through the gap, dropping stun grenades into corridors and mapping tripwires with infrared beams. The eastern perimeter, once thought impenetrable, was breached in under a minute. The compound matched intelligence layouts. Warehouses to the north, dormitories south, a central courtyard connecting both. Operators split accordingly. One team advanced toward Warehouse A, where more than 60 captives were believed held. Another angled toward Dorm Block C, where women and children were likely confined. At 9:25, defenders counterattacked. 30 mercenaries stormed into the courtyard, rifles flashing, RPGs streaking. Bullets smacked into walls around the SEALs. Smoke grenades billowed as operators bounded forward in pairs, returning precise bursts. Overwatch snipers engaged from outside, punching through windows into firing nests. Overhead, a loitering drone slammed into a rooftop guard post, collapsing it into rubble. Within 3 minutes, the counterattack collapsed. Bodies lay scattered across the courtyard. By 9:28, Warehouse A was breached. Thermite torches cut locks, and operators pushed inside. More than 60 civilians were found chained together in corners. Guards barely resisted before being silenced. Hostages were rushed toward the breach, guided by SEALs carrying ballistic shields. Medics checked them quickly, dehydrated, shaken, but alive. Drones orbited overhead, watching rooftops for ambushes. Resistance stiffened around Dorm Block C. Stairwells had been reinforced with sandbags, corridors lined with improvised explosive devices. Operators deployed micro-drones to trigger traps remotely, clearing pathways before entry. Flash grenades burst inside rooms, disorienting defenders long enough for SEALs to storm in. Shots echoed through hallways, controlled and deliberate. Hostages, mostly women and children, were pulled from locked doors, terrified but unharmed. At 9:31, the cartel attempted to seize momentum with an improvised armored vehicle. Welded from heavy steel and armed with a mounted gun, it rolled toward the breach. Operators braced for incoming fire. Before the weapon could open up, a loitering munition dove into the axle. The blast shredded its wheels and froze the vehicle mid-roll. Flames rose as mercenaries abandoned it, only to be cut down by precision fire. Morale broke instantly. By 9:33, more than 120 hostages had been located. They were shepherded down cleared corridors in tight formations, SEALs forming protective columns around them. Snipers suppressed rooftops, drones hovered low, ready to ram exposed gunners. Civilians moved quickly, clutching one another, faces etched with fear and relief. At 9:37, the last strongpoint came into focus, a central blockhouse where cartel leaders had entrenched themselves with captives as shields. Heavy explosives were ruled out. Instead, operators launched stun drones through vents. The blast rattled defenders long enough for teams to breach. Precision fire cut them down in seconds. Hostages were pulled clear, and the leadership pocket collapsed. By 9:40, all captives had been accounted for. The tally was 182 civilians rescued, none harmed. With the primary mission complete, focus shifted to securing contraband. Inside warehouses, 1,300 chemical drums were photographed, cataloged, and sealed. Adjacent rooms revealed crates of rifles, belt-fed weapons, and improvised rockets, evidence of industrial-level capability. Engineers set demolition charges on unusable structures. At 9:45, extraction began. Armored vehicles pre-positioned east of the fortress rolled in under drone cover. Civilians were loaded in groups, while helicopters hovered low, ready for emergency hoist. Sporadic gunfire erupted from scattered defenders, but their radios had been blinded. Coordination was gone. Snipers neutralized stragglers, ensuring no counterattack could form. By 9:47, the fortress was neutralized. Towers smoldered, warehouses burned, cartel banners lay trampled. Engineers wired demolition charges across key sites, preparing to erase what remained. The entire battle had lasted barely 30 minutes. More than 300 mercenaries were killed or captured. A supply chain worth billions was dismantled. All hostages were alive. The message was clear: deception, speed, and precision had triumphed over numbers and fortifications. Yet one question remained: as helicopters lifted off with rescued civilians? If a cartel fortress with walls, towers, and hundreds of guards could fall this fast, how would rival networks adapt? Would they scatter into smaller cells or attempt to build new bastions even deeper underground? And if you were planning America's next move, would you strike preemptively to prevent such fortresses from rising again, or wait and risk confronting another billion-dollar trap at the border? By 9:58 a.m., the final convoy of rescued civilians crossed into the secured perimeter east of the fortress. Medical personnel rushed forward with triage kits, checking pulses and hydration levels. The numbers confirmed what many had thought impossible. 182 hostages had been freed, none harmed. Families on the U.S. side of the border received the news as if it were a miracle delivered in daylight. Inside the smoldering compound, the extent of the dismantling became undeniable. More than 1,300 chemical drums were stacked in warehouses, a stockpile valued at nearly $5 billion in illicit markets. Weapons caches revealed crates of assault rifles, belt-fed machine guns, and improvised rocket systems. Communications equipment, seized intact, promised to expose supplier networks and financial trails. Over 300 mercenaries had been killed or captured, their attempt to defend the fortress collapsing in under half an hour. Engineers methodically placed demolition charges across hardened positions, reducing once formidable walls to rubble. By 10:12 a.m., analysts already framed the outcome in two dimensions. Tactically, the cartel had lost a stronghold, its supply chain shattered, and its leaders scattered. Strategically, a warning had been broadcast to every network along the border. Fortifications, human shields, and firepower would not protect billion-dollar empires from precision operations. The United States had demonstrated a doctrine that combined overwhelming capability with deliberate restraint, power applied without indiscriminate destruction. Symbolism mattered as much as results. Just 7 miles from El Paso, a fortress had been built to project intimidation back across the U.S. frontier. Its sudden collapse proved that no bastion, no matter how fortified, could withstand a blend of drone swarms, special operations, and electronic dominance. By refusing to rely on heavy bombs, Washington showed discipline in the face of pressure, underscoring that credibility came from control as much as from force. The cost, for once, was not counted in American lives. No operators had been lost, though the risk had been extreme. 2 decades of hostage rescue, counterterrorism, and joint operations had been compressed into 30 minutes of combat that would be studied in detail by planners. It was not only a victory on the ground, but a template for dismantling transnational networks while preserving human life. To allies, the operation sent reassurance. The United States would act decisively to protect civilians, even against entrenched criminal armies. To adversaries, the lesson was blunt. Building fortresses near the border or hiding behind hostages would not prevent retaliation. In less than 1 hour, a fortress collapsed. Billions in illicit capacity were erased, and nearly 200 lives were saved. The battle near El Paso was over, but the strategic message would echo far beyond the desert. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this deep dive into military secrets hooked you, hit subscribe to Military Power and ring the bell for more breakdowns on tactics, tech, and strategy.